This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Wednesday Twilight Show. I'm your host, Michelle, and tonight I'm joined by two very special guests. We've got Miss Hope Fashina and Miss Lauren Bassett. Both of them will join me as we reflect and have an open discussion on the impact of the different teacher training pathways in the UK. How effective are they? Is there room for
This
improvement?
is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
And welcome once again, everyone, to our Twilight session. It's so good to see some people online already. Welcome, welcome. We do look forward to having you in our discussion, and I can't wait to hear what you have to share with us this evening. But let me pause for a moment and welcome our very, very special guests. On tonight's show, it's indeed an honor to welcome Miss Hope Fashina. She has 4 years teaching experience and 2 years of middle leadership as a pastoral leader. She's currently taking a year out of teaching to broaden her scope as an educator. She's a Teach First trainee, and we're looking forward to hearing more about Hope's lovely, strange, wonderful experiences. So, welcome, Hope, and thank you for joining
Thank you
us.
for having me.
We Awesome. We also have on tonight's show Miss Lauren Bassett, who has worked with young people in various settings for the last decade. She began her career in education as a lay chaplain in a Catholic comprehensive school before taking on an apprenticeship route into teaching. She's currently in her second year of ECT, and despite training as an English specialist, has recently become lead teacher of dance. So, welcome, Lauren. And once again, we do look forward to hearing from you as well, to hear about your route into teaching, your challenges, and your successes so far. So, ladies, welcome and thank you for sparing the time to join us on Teachers Talk Radio. I know it's Wednesday, the middle of the week, there's lots on. As a matter of fact, we got the call. We got the call on Monday. So we've been busy preparing for our equivalent of Ofsted. But listen, nothing stops us when it comes to Teachers Talk Radio. The show must go on. So, listeners, remember to download the Podbean app, call us, or send us a message. Let's hear your thoughts on teacher training today versus the traditional PGC route. What are the pros and cons? What is the middle ground? Stay tuned as we hear from our sponsors.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
Welcome again, everyone. Listeners who've already joined us, welcome. Good to see you online, Tom. Thank you for joining us. Tom is my boss. So good to have you online. It is very reassuring, Tom, to say the least. I also like to welcome some listeners all the way in Kingston, Jamaica, and I keep forgetting to mention them every week. They do make the time to tune in. We appreciate that. So remember to download the Podbean app, So you can call in or text us your message. Tom says, no, I'm not the boss. Okay, Tom is my colleague then, for want of a better word than Tom. So before we begin this discussion, which I think will be another engaging, exciting, relevant one, I just wanted to give some background and some context to this particular topic and the way we will approach it. And so we're looking at the many different routes to teacher training today. And are there too many? Are they serving the purpose? Are they all relevant? So these are some frank and honest discussions we want to have. But it is important to note that the idea of formal teacher training was something new at the start of the 19th century. And prior to that, those who held Oxbridge degrees or clerical skills taught middle and upper class children, while the working class were taught by anyone literate or numerate. And so, to regulate provision, various methods of teacher training have been introduced over the years. So, teacher training provision has been described as a swinging pendulum by some people, moving between a school based or apprenticeship model or to a college or university based model. So, what we see here today is absolutely nothing new. And for those of us who've been around the proverbial block in education, we know that the names of ideas or ideologies change, but the fundamental principles remain the same. So, the constant shift between both often raise questions about the quality of teaching and learning and ultimately education. And the influences for teacher demand varies. It depends on the demand we have for teachers. It depends on a change in government and policies or even funding and remuneration. So today we really want to unpick some of the provisions we have. We'll hear from Hope as a Teach First trainee. And of course, we'll hear from Lauren, who went down the apprenticeship route. And myself, I went the traditional college-based route. Let me just pause to welcome Emily, a colleague of mine, both here in Dubai in school and also from Teachers Talk Radio. Welcome, Emily. I look forward to hearing from you as well. And I know to take the time out 10 o'clock at night here in Dubai is a sacrifice. So I appreciate that. Ewan was there somewhere. Hopefully Ewan will rejoin us so we can hear from him as well. So I was just talking about the different pathways. And so today, various teacher training pathways have been established to keep up with teacher shortages, similar to the 1800s, where systems were put in place to meet those demands. And there are still those, unfortunately or fortunately, who are of the opinion that college-based training is still the best approach for various reasons. But listeners, if you're a teacher, whichever route you have taken, what you have done is join a very, very noble profession. So, whatever route you've taken, there are no biases tonight, but people are free to express their opinions. You have taken a noble route. And Lauren, I'm going to start with you first. And the first thing I'd like you to share with us is, when did you decide to become a teacher and why? That question is for Lauren. If you could, let's hear. When did you decide to become a teacher and why did you make this decision? You're breaking up a little bit, Lauren. So I'm going to ask you to sort that and Hope, if in the meantime you could share with us, please, whilst Lauren will sort her sound out. When did you decide to become a teacher, Hope, and why?
I think I decided to become a teacher second year of university, trying to decide what I wanted to do, but I knew that I had a passion for the youth, so I started a program where I emailed loads of schools in the local area in Birmingham and asked if I could come in and just do like a little workshop to build confidence for young girls. And I realized that I would make it even when it's raining, but I would not go to my own lectures when it's raining. And that's when I was like, actually, this brings me joy and this is something that I'm really passionate about. Then I was like, actually, where can I put that into practice? Where can I use that? And it became schools. And after doing that for 2 years, just before COVID hit, I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to go into teaching. And yeah, that's where I applied for Teach First.
Okay, thank you. And my parents will tell you that I made the decision to become a teacher when I was very young. I think, according to my mom, I was about 4 years old when I decided to become a teacher. But my impression of becoming a teacher was a little bit warped, because what I would do, I would line up my mom's flower pots with flowers in them, and they would be my students. And if they'd fail to hand in their homework or any assignment, I would get the belt and I would give them a fine beating, because at the time, that was my interpretation of teaching. And so the poor flowers, they would suffer under the hands of my punitive measures. Uh, of course, I did not follow that particular route, but yes, we all develop a passion, and there has to be that underlying reason and that drive to become a teacher. Lauren, are you ready for us? When did you decide to become a teacher, and why? Are you there,
I think she's
Lauren?
still reconnecting.
Okay, that is absolutely fine. We are going to take a short break, listen to our sponsors, and when we come back, I do hope to hear from some of our listeners. Just tell us about your own journey as well. Why did you decide to become a teacher, and when?
This is Teachers Talk.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
So, just looking at some of the comments, Emily said she wanted to make a difference, and she also liked the creativity of lesson planning. Emily, I agree with you on that. I cannot stand a boring lesson, so I always like to interject some creativity or switch things up in the middle of a lesson when I feel like, if I'm this tired, how are my students feeling? Tom said, why did I become a teacher? Whole family did it. Think it was inevitable. Tom, I think it's in your DNA. If the whole family did it, there was no way of escaping that route, and it was a good decision, I must say. Emily said, you were also inspired. You said, Emily, by great teachers and teachers in movies like Coach Carter, Miss Honey in Matilda, and Freedom Writers. That's amazing, Emily. So wide um, breadth of ideas there about what inspired you to become a teacher. And I love the fact that you were not only inspired by real teachers, but by fictitious ones as well. That is so interesting. If anybody has the same experience, please share with us. That would be really, really intriguing to share with everybody else. So we were talking about why we chose to become teachers. And then we're going to look a little bit now on the route that we chose to take, because that's what the discussion is about. So I went down the college-based route. And so after secondary school, I enrolled in a teacher training college in Jamaica, where I studied for 3 years. And this consisted of both practical and theoretic approaches to teacher training. And in my opinion, it was very thorough. We had consistent professional guidance, exams, and frequent assessments. But at that point, I thought that was the only route. I thought that was the only way you could become a teacher. Study for 3 years, full time, 6 months or 8 months of teaching practice, and then you're given a certificate and you move into the world of teaching. But I've come to realize that there are other routes to this. So, Hope, I'm coming back to you, and I'd like you to describe for us your training years, the process, the training modules, if you could remember, your first placement, and the level of support. It's a lot to take in, but so what was it like? the process, the modules, your placement, especially that initial placement?
Um, okay, so mine was really different because I did go down the Teach First route and I went down during lockdown, so just the COVID times. So I in 2020, well, 2019, October, I did my application. It was a very long application, and after you finish that, then you have to go into then you get shortlisted, and then you do a whole day of like different activities. It was quite a rigorous, very rigorous application process. Trying to become a teacher, so it felt like there was a lot of pressure, and I guess it tries to highlight how important the job is.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. It felt like you were going into like a business, and it was in like these big business buildings, these corporate buildings, and you had a whole day of sessions. And the first part, you had to deliver a lesson where they would give you feedback on the spot, and then you would have to then act on that feedback on the spot. So you didn't have time to really change your lesson. You just had to repeat the same lesson, but with the one feedback they had given you. So it was quite interesting to, I guess what they were trying to see was how well can you react to feedback, because the whole 2 years is going to be pretty much feedback and trying to improve yourself. There was a group activity, and then obviously as that went on, I believe the whole day was like from 9 a.m. to about 4 p.m. So it's quite a long day, breaks in between, but we did have different activities all throughout. When that finished, then also I received my confirmation that I was going to receive a school soon. And as mentioned, lockdown came about in March. So unfortunately, they did let a lot of people go,
Okay.
because there wasn't a lot. So a lot of teachers were not leaving schools at that time because they needed that security that they were going to go back to their schools because there was lockdown. Lucky enough for me, I was able to get my placement in a school in Birmingham, who I was their first Teach First. So I was new to the role, and obviously they were new to having a Teach First teacher. Um, I would say starting in that school, it was, as you know, as most people know about Teach First anyway, a lot of Teach First schools are quite difficult schools in terms of the area that it's in. So the context is quite different, quite challenging. And we have to work with a lot of people from low economic backgrounds. And I think it's just the idea that there was a lack of motivation. And as a new teacher, it was very hard to, start learning and then also try to show that you're an expert in that role, because a lot of students will lose faith in you because they're like, you just started 5 minutes ago, miss. You don't know what you're doing. But you have to keep this front of, I can do it. And, we had two assignments, two 6,000 word assignments a year. And we started to do that with having a lot of drop-ins. We had um, a lot of drop-ins that meant that we had to fill out these really long lesson plans that could take sometimes 3 hours filling it out, because you had to describe every single part of your lesson. Why was it important, that part? How are you going to show impact in that part of your lesson? And that had to be delivered to your mentor and your university mentor at the time as well, or university tutor, sorry, at the time. So it was quite an intense time, trying to make sure that you enjoy the role and fulfilled all the admin part that came with the role, especially being new to, the working for me anyway, because I literally went straight from uni to working. I've gone from agency jobs to actually having to be up for, and be at school 7:30, 7:15, and making sure that I have my lessons planned. And there's a point where because you start straight from the classroom, no one's there to support you, no one sits at the back to make sure you're saying the right thing. And like I said, as mentioned earlier, I was the first Teach First. My school was a little bit nervous, so there was a point for about 3 weeks where I had to send all my lessons in advance, every single lesson I was going to teach that week. So yeah, it was quite an intense process. The modules were really good. I really enjoyed the assignments that Birmingham City University gave to us. It was an amazing, in terms of the actual like learning and the days we had out to go to university. I didn't actually go in because of COVID, but the days we had out was amazing. I really enjoyed every one of my assignments. I enjoyed talking about who I was in the classroom, adding that to theory, and then putting that into practice. So yeah, it was an intense intense time, but it was really
Thank you.
shaping.
Rewarding. Yeah, and
Absolutely.
shaping. That's a good word and a good way to look at it, Hope. Thanks for that. Just a question based on what you've said, and thanks for that very comprehensive description. So you mentioned that you were the first teach first in your school. Do you think they were equipped to assist you and to support you the way you expected?
Uh,
Or do you
unfortunately,
think they were also trying to understand the process themselves?
yeah, I think that was the second one. Absolutely, they were still trying to figure out how it worked. They were still learning the process. There was a lot of time when I had to say, "Oh, by the way, I don't want to miss this deadline." Like, what deadline? So I do
Okay.
think, especially because in the time that it was, because it was the COVID years, schools were learning as well, and then adding that was a lot for them. So yeah, I
Mhm.
would say that they weren't as equipped, unfortunately, to aid my training as much. I was left alone quite a bit, but I had a
Yeah.
great mentor. It's just that she also needed the backing of like senior leadership, and she didn't have as much of that because they were trying to figure out how to run the school in the time
Okay.
that we were in.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And let me just pause here to welcome other guests or other listeners who've joined. Thank you so much. Remember to download the Podbean app, and you can call in or you can send us a message, ask a question, but do join in the conversation. Ewan, welcome. I will be hearing from you shortly. Um, Hope, just one other quick question. You mentioned that when you enter the classroom, you had to put on a kind of front to show the students, who, by the way, are very intuitive listeners. You can't fool our students. Um, how did you manage to stand in front of them as a figure of authority, fresh faced, cherub faced, and trying to convince them that you are the authority in the room?
I think it's confidence, right? As teachers, I learnt that. I think after a few weeks, we're actors. Teachers are actors in terms of we have to always show up,
Mhm.
and we have to always be what they need in that room. And if that means we have to be quite strict today because we can tell that they've just come back from lunchtime, and that might not be the mood that we're in, that is what we have to give them.
Yeah.
So I think it was acting. It was pretty much acting and
Mhm.
saying that I do know what I'm doing. I know why I'm here, and I'm going to make sure that by the end of this lesson, you guys know what this is, and you guys have learned this, and I know what you guys need.
Okay.
So yeah, it was, it was pretty much
Yeah.
acting.
Very performative. Yep, I totally agree. Thank you so much. Lauren, I'm going to ask you the same question. I hope we can hear you much better this time.
Hopefully.
Um, yes. How, if you could describe for us your training years, because your route was slightly different from Hope's. So tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about it.
So my big thing when I wanted to get into teaching, I was living away from home, and having been a chaplain, I had already had a salary. So it was really important that I had a salaried route because I wouldn't
Mhm.
have been able to afford unsalaried. But the issue with the salaried route is the amount of money that the school have to pay for your PGCE. So quite often they can be reluctant to go for that salaried route. So instead, I was offered the apprenticeship, which was, when I did it, a brand new scheme, and it was run by Tess.
Mhm.
So it was all very, very new, and very few people sort of knew what was going on, even kind of the Tess organisers. But the brilliant thing about it was that you went in with a timetable where I think I was teaching about on average, about 4 lessons a day. But
Okay.
I had one day off to complete assignments and research and learning. But a lot of it was done on the job in the room. I remember on that first day in September, and I'd never taught English, and suddenly it was like, yeah, so you got a full timetable, off you go. And I would be observed once a week by my mentor, and then you had another mentor who was external, and they would come in once a term, once every 2 term, for a formal
Mhm.
observation, and just kind of like check in and be like, oh, have you done this piece of paperwork and this piece of paperwork? There were so many benefits to it, but I think I would rather have done it maybe now or maybe next year. Whereas the year that I did it, it was all over the place because people were just starting to learn how to put it together. So an apprenticeship I think it's by UK law, you have to do an apprenticeship. You have to do that job for a year. And because in teaching you have so many weeks off, it means that a teaching apprenticeship you do for a year and a half. So yeah, it's quite bizarre, but you kind of qualify in your first year and you're given QTS, and then suddenly there's a final assessment so that you get your level 6 in teaching, which happens in about the October of the following year. But yeah.
So Lauren, would you agree that, like Hope said, it was very intense, the first year especially?
Yeah, definitely. Because on top of teaching, and kind of like a fairly full timetable where you're expected to do parents' evenings, you're expected to do marking, you're expected to prepare students for exams. You've also got your assessments, and if you want to do the PGCE, you've still got that to do. And you've got all of these weekly tasks that you have to keep up with, as well as your mentor meetings and logging your notes and logging your observations. And it's a lot of paperwork in the background. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And so far, both of you have shared the volume of paperwork. And I mean, that goes across the board. Whatever route you take, you have to brace yourself for the paperwork and just manage your time. Ewan, welcome and thanks for calling in. Could you share with us, Ewan, a little bit about your experience, the route you took into teaching and your early years?
Hi, Michelle. So just sort of starting off then, I think my route into teaching was a lot like a lot of people's, but I think I differentiated my experience because I made the active decision and actively requested to go back to my own local community.
Okay.
And I think the reason why I got into that in the first place is that I felt that I wanted to make a difference. I very much agreed with the Teach First, the mission statement. And coming from an area of high socioeconomic deprivation, that was something that I wanted to try and rectify and show that there is a route out. I think, like many people, though, what I found is that, learning to become your own administrator effectively and handle that level of work, in addition to the requirements and the responsibility that, educating the next generation brings, was certainly a challenge that I was not expecting in its entirety. They did continually say, it's the deep end, it's the deep end, it's the deep end. But you never know how deep it is until you're actually swimming. Yeah. But I think I'm very much in agreement both with Hope and Lauren. Obviously, so I, coming from that Teach First background, like Hope, though, I did find that the paperwork side, in terms of talking about every single detail of my lesson and everything that I planned and the nuances. I mean, I remember I once had a lesson plan that was over 3,000 words long, and with all of the boxes, it was over 8 pages, and that was just for an hour's work, and really putting that time and dedication. It is a full-on commitment, and I think obviously when you realise what has gone into teaching from a traditional role, and obviously the easing in, you can see why actually something like that can be achievable. But I think the rigorousness of the process now has in fact meant that obviously you are learning these skills so quickly, and it's only like it's inevitable, isn't it, that you will make those mistakes. But obviously then we need to question what the consequences of that are in such a short time frame on the children of today.
Thank you so much, Ewan. Thanks for sharing that. And you mentioned also, just as Hope did, the detailed notes that you had to attach to your lesson plans. Hope, I'm coming back to you. Would you say that helped to shape your approach to teaching, or do you think it wasn't as relevant when you got into it? All those notes, did they help you become the teacher you are?
Very good question. I think at the start they were really helpful because then you can kind of imagine your lesson. So, and every part of your lesson felt like it had a purpose. However, as time went along, it felt that you were just repeating a lot of the things that you were saying. Because let's be honest, every lesson can be planned, but there will be changes depending on how the lesson goes. So it felt like, yes, I've got this script ready, and I said I'm going to call on this child and this child and this child because they're low ability. But then that child might not be in. And now I'm like, okay, I really said I was going to call you three. Who do I call now? So there is that fear or that panic because you're like, they've made you get into a script kind of teaching, and then so it made it sometimes difficult to act on the spot because you don't know if your tutors and your observers were looking at that and seeing that, oh, actually you didn't do this, why didn't you do that, which some of them were like. So yeah, I think as you first start, absolutely is helpful, but as you start to progress, it did just feel like a tedious process.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Lauren, what do you think? Did you have to do the same thing where you had to justify every single bit of your lesson plan?
I would in a meeting. So meeting my mentor, my mentor would ask me, "Oh, what was your decision, or what was your rationale behind doing this?" But I was quite lucky in the fact that we didn't have to really put it into our lesson plans per se.
Okay.
It just came to kind of like an overarching like conversation, like, "Oh, why did you choose to do this?" But it is quite contradictory, I think, in teacher training, because while they want you to make sure you've got everything planned for like every eventuality, they then are very much kind of really quick to turn around and be like, "Oh, but don't stick with that if it's not working, because that's the sign of a good teacher." So all the way through, you're kind of, it's very mixed signals. It's like, oh yes, you have to have everything you need to know who you're asking, you need to know why you're asking, but at the same time, if it's not working, then just do something else, because that shows that you're adaptable. I think it is all of the practical stuff and reflecting on that practical stuff that's important, whether that be in conversation or writing it down in journals or entries or whatever.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've got some other questions to ask, but let me just pause and say, welcome, Charles. I think you were there briefly, but welcome anyway. And remember, download the Podbean app and do call in or send us a message. I'd love to hear about your journey. We have some hard-hitting questions coming up, so make sure you do not miss out. When you talked about being thrown in the deep end, as a trainee, how did you tread water? How did you stay afloat? Because even as an experienced teacher and some of the experiences I have, I always think if people don't have the experience, how do they cope with some of the challenges? So just tell us briefly, as a trainee, how did you cope in that deep end?
I think in part it comes to seeing that there is a culture of learning not only with you but the community that you're a part of, and I think coming from that teach first background that we did have quite a large cohort, but it was advantageous in the sense obviously that there were lots of cohorts, and in this sense they were online. I initially thought that having an online cohort and not meeting up in person was something of a disadvantage, because obviously it does create that sense of isolation. But actually having that online community did make it somewhat more natural in terms of the sharing of resources, in terms of like venting if things were difficult, finding what the trials and tribulations of the job really were. So I think actually just embracing the communities that you're a part of, and also recognizing that in the organization but also within the school, nobody wants you to fail.
Yeah. So very supportive community.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what helped you.
Yeah, no,
Awesome.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so you've talked about the process. We've got two Teach First here on the line, and we've got Lauren who went down the apprenticeship route. So now your training has come to an end. Do you think you were fully equipped to face the realities of the classroom after your training? So I want you to share with us your initial thoughts and some of those challenges. When the training wheels came off, you no longer had a supervisor or mentor or coach constantly watching over you. What were some of those challenges, and how did you deal with it? I'm going to start with you, Lauren.
God, yeah, it's a tough question. I think I was definitely at an advantage when I went into it, having worked in a school for so long, because I remember at one point the external mentor turned around, she was like, "Oh, you've got to be like one of the best trainee teachers I've ever seen." And I sort of thought it was a bit of a con, because I was like, well, I've been teaching for like 8 years just without actually teaching a specific subject. And I think a lot of it comes down to working out what is the important stuff and not being afraid to make decisions in your own classroom.
Mhm.
So you know those students who are in front of you. And as long as every decision you make is to better their outcomes, and you know how to make best, or you know how to better those outcomes, you know how they work best. And I think it's having the courage of your convictions and still being able to rationalize that and still being able to verbalize why you've made that decision, because that's something that you pick up in teacher training. But I think that is the big thing, turning around and being like, no, I know my students, this is how they're going to be able to do it. And having those outcomes to prove that, look, I did that and they succeeded, that was the right choice to make. But I think that's the big thing, just having that confidence in yourself, because once you're in the room on your own, that's the person you've got to lean on for confidence. You can't spend your whole time running around after somebody else being like, oh, please tell me I'm doing the right thing. You've got to have that courage and be like, no, this is the right thing, I've made this decision. And if it's not, again, changing it, being like, okay, that didn't work, thought it was going to, so what can I do instead? And whether that be through reading or resources online or joining like groups on social media, whatever it might be, but constantly keeping your eyes open to new ways of doing things.
Totally agree. And it's about being reflective and reflexive. So changing as you go along and changing after thinking about it. Hope, what about you? Tell me some of the challenges. And remember, on this forum, you can be very honest. We're not looking at teaching through rose-colored glasses. We know the challenges. So what were some of your challenges once you ended your training?
I think for me, the challenge was during the training.
Okay.
I actually felt like after the training was over, I felt like I wasn't doing enough anymore because I didn't have as much things to do. Because when you're doing a training, you don't realize how much you are doing whilst you are training. That be the assignments or the fact that, because we have to prove that we are hitting each teacher standards, you're having to actually, for example, for one of the standards, I had to do a mark sheet for all my classes and write comments for every single child. And I had to do that because I had to prove that I was considering the children. Oh, here's proof of that. And it was just weird after coming off training that, okay, so what do I do now? Am I doing the right thing? And you don't have as much people come into your classes anymore to come and watch what you're doing either, because they're like, yeah, you've got this now. You've had 3 years of training. So you also like Lauren kind of said, how do you make decisions now, because there's no one to answer to apart from you being the person in charge in the room. So I think for me it was almost like feeling like I wasn't doing enough anymore, or not trying to decide what was important from what I got from my training, because I was doing so many things during my training. I didn't know if this was important or if this wasn't important, or what was actually helping my classes. Am I just showboating, or am I actually being the teacher I'm supposed to be?
That's interesting, Hope. So are you saying that there's a gap between the training years and then becoming a teacher? Would you say that there's a failure and a breakdown somewhere? Because if the intensity is no longer there, then that could result in boredom and maybe a lack of that desire and passion for teaching. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, but this is the thing though. Some people are not then, because it's so difficult at the start. You don't know that if that's meant to be what it's meant to look like when they
Okay.
finish. And I don't want the push is that I don't know if they make it intense on purpose, because then it's so intense that a lot of people then now are dropping out of teaching, or are not trying to go down the teaching route, because they are seeing how intense it is and how much the workload is, that because they've had to add extra workload to what the job already gives you. So when you now come out of that, or if you are able to survive that 2 years or 3 years of training, you're now like, okay, so am I doing enough? Is this enough? So I think it's hard to say that, because someone else could say, actually, that was too intense for me, I'm not doing this anymore. Whereas for some people, that is what drives them. So I think for me, it was like, okay, now that I've finished the 3 years and I am used to do more work, I went down the pastoral route and said, I'm going to do more. Pastoral, everyone knows that pastoral adds a bit more to your workload, or doing any extra thing in school will always add more to your workload. So I think I found myself searching for, I need more, because I've always been so busy in my first years of teaching.
That is so interesting, Hope. And it is interesting because I've had the same discussions with colleagues, after moving to Dubai. And when I left the UK, I was director of learning for English. And then I came here as a classroom teacher and then was asked to help out as second in charge. And that intensity that came with being at the helm of leadership wasn't there initially. And as Emily would confirm, we had lengthy discussions about that. And so maybe other people can't relate, but as teachers, we always want to be doing something. That's what I find. And we always want to impact change and to be making a difference. And so if we're not given the tools or the opportunities to do that, then we get this boredom and then people decide to leave. I'll come back to that, Hope, because that we need to talk about that as it relates to the decision you made later on. Ewan, do you want to share with us some of the challenges you faced once the training wheels were off and you were almost left on your own now to sink or swim?
Yeah, so I think we could probably consider theoretically, things like Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve, and I think I was very much I fell into that because I think I lived to the framework. I respected the framework. I thought that a framework is what I must follow. It's a code, but then after you finish the initial training and you are sort of free running the fields in education, it's the little things I think that get you. I think in terms of staying on top of routines, staying collectively on board with teaching, the mission and the motivation. I think it's not inherently that I lost motivation for teaching, but I think very much like Hope, the challenge had dropped away because suddenly there was less, and I think there's a certain amount of complacency that I then began to feel, and I think actually then realizing that no, now this is my own journey to form. This is actually I've got to find my own direction now and decide where I want to go with it. And I think when we consider actually that lots of people found the challenge and the intensity, and some people decide to go in different directions with education, whether that be inside of it or outside of it. It is at the end of the day, I think in many ways, like Teach First had them been, is like a stepping stone. Lots of people, as it was traditionally, teach first, you teach first and you do something else. But those of us that obviously sort of stay in it and are in it and want to continue to be in it, obviously there's that lack of like future aspirations, and you do have to find them yourselves. And I think sometimes I do sometimes wish I had a bit more direction sometimes, but I think slowly but surely after a year out after that I am starting to find my way and the direction that I do want to go in.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks for that very honest review. And that's going to link to some of the discussions we'll have later on. The fact that some people use the teach first route as a stepping stone. I'd like to unpick that a little bit more. But my question before we go for another break is, where is that breakdown then? And who's responsible? Who do you think is responsible for maintaining that momentum and keeping young, bright minds in the classroom? Because so far, both Hope and Ewan, you've both said, after that intense training and that demanding expectation, then all of a sudden there's a lull. So, who is responsible for maintaining that high and that drive? Hope, do you want to tell us what you think? Is it yourself or is it the government, the policies, the teachers, the leaders?
I think for me, it was the leaders. I would say obviously myself as well, but the leaders play a big part. As mentioned, I was head of year by my second year of teaching. So by my second Teach First year, I was head of year, which some would argue that it was too early for me. But I think for me it was perfect for me because I needed more, and I needed to know what route I wanted to go down. And my school thought, "Oh, you're doing Teach First. Teach First is a leadership. It's a leadership program. You should be doing something else now." I wish maybe there was like a deputy head, not maybe straight not into head of year, but that intensity. I think that because my head teacher noticed that in me and said, "You know what, I think you'd be great in this field." That was what pushed me and made me carry on going. I wish I had more support at the time. I think if it wasn't for the lack of support, I would have definitely probably stayed in that school as well and carried on with that year group. I think if not, I didn't have the support that I was hoping I would have during that time, it
Yeah.
would have been a perfect opportunity for me. But yeah, I think the leaders, I think when we feel like we're adults, but we're also still kids, especially when you've just come out of uni. If someone says, I see you doing this, and I think you'd be amazing at this. There's that boost of confidence, especially when you've just started.
Okay.
So I think it's maybe starting to gear us like that just finished training to
Mm.
not straight away leadership roles, but maybe getting us to be
Mm.
behind some leaders in schools and making sure
To
that we are
shadow
also
them.
exactly almost like shadowing them, just that we can see what is next for us, so that we still have that drive moving forward as teachers.
Yeah. We're going to develop on that point later on, but is it Atil Jane has joined us? And I'd love to hear your contribution or your question. Please go ahead. Tell us what you've got to share with us. Is it Atul? Jane?
Yes, Atul Jain is speaking.
Yes? Do you want to share with us your teacher training experience?
Teachers training education. I have taught the students in schools 5 years.
Hmm. And what was your training route?
The students are understand easily and find comfortable with me, and
Okay.
cooperative behavior they show, and support
Oh,
mentally.
good. Do you mind telling us where you're calling from? So, because you're saying that the kids have been well behaved and very cooperative, so we'd love to know which part of the world you're calling from.
I'm from India, Agra, Uttar Pradesh.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm glad your experience is great, and just stay tuned, and we'll talk some more about that. And everybody else, do stay tuned. We will now hear from our sponsors.
Thank you.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. And just to sum up what we've talked about so far. So we've talked about the different routes to teacher training and the challenges. We've talked about the intensity of the training, and what's coming out of the discussion in the last 10 minutes is that gap in between having been trained, now you're a full-fledged teacher, but the intensity isn't there anymore. And then what we're getting are a breed of teachers who are becoming a little bit bored of the provision and the challenges and the opportunities. And as Ewan and Hope said, some people then move on into the corporate world and they see this as a stepping stone. And I really want to take the next section of the discussion a bit further and to delve deeper into that. So we know that we have different routes to teacher training, and we've got the BA in education, we've got the PGC route, we've got the SCIT, which is a school-centered initial teacher training route. One of my colleagues today said, and I quote, she said, "Best decision ever. I went straight into the classroom and I loved it." And that was for the SCIT route. We've got the early years provision as well, the school's direct training program. And of course, we've got the Teach First. So before each show, I ask people their opinions on the topic. And one particular person, she was very passionate about this, and she said, "Don't get me started." And she said for her, the accelerated route seems to promote leadership rather than teaching people to hone their skills in the classroom. So it's about leadership. And Hope, I heard you mention a bit of that, and we'll talk some more about it. She went on to say this was to the detriment of the school and pupil progress because of a lack of subject knowledge and skills. So, my question to you is, how far do you agree with the statement that the accelerated program is about leadership? But what we need are people in front of our students who will be delivering effective, highly skilled, highly well prepared lessons. Lauren, what do you think? I know your route was a little bit different, but share your opinion.
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing Hope and Ewan, and it comes back to a question that I was talking with an ex-colleague the other day. Now, I'm just a few years older than both Ewan and Hope, and I didn't do kind of like go to university and straight out of university go into teaching, but a friend of mine did. And she went through her teaching and she loved it. And all her life, she wanted to be an English teacher. And then by the age of like 25, she'd done that. And she found it really tough because that was her big dream. That was her big ambition. And being 25 is too early to be a head of department. And so she found it really difficult because she was like, well, I've done it. It's kind of the same sort of sensation as those people who say win a gold medal at the Olympics. They spend all of those years kind of like, that's what they're dreaming of, that's what their aim is. And then suddenly they get it. And it's like, oh, well, what do I do next? And I think that's where you see the difference between kind of, you know, those athletes who then go on to continuously win gold medals and those people who do it once and it's the most incredible thing, but then they're never able to kind of get that drive back. And I wonder whether that's very similar. Whereas I went into teaching kind of later on, I'd already done that sort of sense of kind of like loads and loads of work, putting loads of my energy and effort into something. And then suddenly I was about 27 and I was like, right, I'm going to do teaching now because it's something that I really want to do. And so I personally feel that I don't have that sense of, oh, I need to be doing the next thing. I need that drive and that intensity. Okay. But I can't help but feel that things like Teach First, which is all about promoting you to leadership roles. I remember my principal at my last school, I think he did Teach First, and then within like 2 years, he was a head of department, and then he was on the SLT. And so he'd only been in the classroom, I think, for something about 6 or 7 years, and suddenly he was a head teacher. And with all due respect, he was an awful head teacher because he hadn't worked out those people skills. He hadn't put the groundwork in to get up to that level of being a head teacher. And so I do think these accelerated routes do kind of promote that because it's high intensity, it's a high workload, it's pushing you constantly to, oh, but what more can you do? What more can you do? What more can you give me? And then you do get to that point of not even 30 and think, oh, well, I can't do the next step. So what do I do? And especially if you see around you everybody else being promoted. So if you're in kind of like, if you're in accounting or whatever it might be, and you can get promoted because there's far more levels. Whereas in teaching, there aren't as many levels. And so I think that might be part of the issue.
Thank you so much, Ron, and thank you for that very honest response. And just to buttress what you've said, another colleague actually said for the accelerated trainees, there's a lack of people skills. They can't give effective feedback after observing lessons because they don't really know what they're looking for and they don't have the expertise to give such feedback, especially to more experienced teachers. And this is what she ended her message to me with. It's like passing your driving test and being on the road alone daily. She said they're two different things. And that's how she summed up programs such as Teach First. So, Ewan, share your thoughts. Do you think the accelerated program into leadership is effective? Or as Lauren is saying, you get to a point where you plateau and you're like, what do I do next?
So I think actually I was rather fortunate to be surrounded by a collective of highly talented and very professional people. And I think in many ways, a lot of them were extremely deserving of the positions that they did get. So obviously, obviously when I started in teaching, I remember at the same time I got to the end of my time at my previous school, which was my first ECT year, and my colleague, same level of experience with me, came from somewhat different backgrounds, but again, it was of no aid to either of us in our background, if you understand. And she was promoted to second in department. And I remember also at the same time that there was another person in the department who joined SLT, who had been in teaching, I believe at that point, less than 5 years. And then I'd heard other success stories, if you will. And I think that is the key term there, is success stories, because again, it is very much a narrative we do see of another colleague in a different school, but part of the same trust, who within the first year, I believe, was then sort of seen as someone who could potentially go into leadership, and then they did end up leading a department. So I think one of the things to
Sorry,
consider.
Ewan, but how effective were they as leaders? Did they have all the skills and all the tools that they needed to be effective leaders after 2 years, 3 years in the classroom?
I think the evident answer to that would probably be not, and I think I'm very much in agreement with others there when we say no, because again, I think correct, there is a natural plateau, but I think education is one of those jobs where you do learn on the go. And I'll admit, I was one of those people that said, I really would like to go into leadership at this precise moment. I feel like I'm
I
ready
know
for
Ewan.
it. I feel like I can do it. Yeah, I know
I
you
remember.
but
As a matter of fact, listeners, when I met Ewan, Ewan said to me, "Oh, by the way, I'm coming for your job." Yes, and then a few months later, he said,
paraphrased.
"Oh, Michelle, actually, I don't think I'm ready yet." Yes, go on, Ewan.
I think I admittedly, yes, I had, I think, some arrogance in that, paraphrasing Michelle, but
Yes, paraphrasing.
I definitely have been on a very personal journey when it comes to education and understanding where I would like to go with it. And I think I realised actually quite early that I had reached a plateau in my own personal capacity and ability. And I think that's why, obviously, I started to seek other experiences on top of the training that I had received. So does that in some way suggest that the training I received was insufficient? No, I think in some way it was somewhat suitable for obviously the job that I was going into. However, obviously, I felt, as my own confidence level and my own ability to teach, that I wanted to take that further. So, I'm currently doing a qualification in leading behaviour and culture. I just recently completed my master's in education, focused on autonomy. Thank you very much. But yeah, I think overall, yes, I think it would be correct to say that there is a natural plateau.
Yes. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate the fact that you're all being so honest. So for those of you who are just joining, welcome. Hi there, Roya. And we've got, I saw Romeo earlier. I got excited, but Romeo is gone. I hope Romeo will come back and we can hear from them as well. Lauren said, I think an important part is in employment is employment maturity, which only grows over time. So we've got people saying, well, it's okay if you're at the point in your career where you think you can make that progress, then you should not be denied that opportunity. So if you're 25 and you think you're ready to be head of department, go for it. But at the other end of the spectrum, we have people saying, no, you need that level of experience. You need to develop those people skills before you launch into leadership. Another person wrote into me and said, the obvious difference between the quality and the level of experience of SLT, going back, say, 20 years ago to today, she said it's very different. And this is how she described it. She said 2 teachers came to her school recently for a VP role. She said both of them looked like 12 years old, and one was a network lead prior to applying for that role. And this was her final comment. She said, I would have re-advertised if I were responsible for that, for appointing somebody to that role. Hope, do you think we're being too harsh here, or people are being too harsh, and those who go through the teach first route who are actually trained to push themselves into leadership? Or do you think it is an honest and factual judgment?
Um, I've actually heard this argument a lot. In terms of a lot, I feel like the teachers that didn't go through the classroom route or straight into class, well, most of them anyway, usually say this, that they feel like the teachers that did go through this accelerated route are the ones that are pushing for leadership. But I think it's because of, like you said, it's what we've been told. So when you come in, it's what they've told you to aspire for, and it's really hard to. And they say to you, in order to aspire for that, you need to make sure that your classroom is perfect. So you are striving for this perfect classroom and perfect teacher version of yourself for the first 2 years, or as soon as you get into the classroom, and especially because everything's so tedious and there's so much to do, you feel like they're training you for the workload that you're going to get for leadership. So when you get into leadership, you're like, okay, so I am used to this workload already. I think it's very dependent on the person. I would agree that there would be some people that absolutely need more you need more time in the classroom and more time learning to be around people and learning to actually be in a corporate setting or a teacher setting or even a school before you can actually become a leader in a school. So I think it's very important that it depends on the individual. I think it does depend on the individual in terms of what can that person do in that short amount of time. I would say for me, my second year of going into leadership, some of it was difficult and some of it did deter me away from teaching because I was doing so much as still a trainee. And I felt like there wasn't a clear job title.
Okay.
It wasn't clear of this is what a head of year should do, and this is what a good head of year looks like. I remember going into a line manager meeting with the assistant head that was for behavior at the time, and I said to him, I don't know what I am doing. And his response was, yeah, you're meant to just, it feels like that sometimes. That's just how I'm meant to feel like. But what I wanted was, every day, this is what should be done. Every week, this is what you should show. I'm
some
looking for
structure.
this. Exactly. I needed some structure. And I don't know if that's because of the school, or I don't know if that's because of the way leadership was at that time, or whatever the case was. So I think, again, because I wanted to do a lot, I went into teaching wanting to change everything. Not everything, but I was big on change, and I was big on, like, I had this dream of, I want to make sure I impact this and I want to impact that, and I really want, because I feel like the students will see this in this. And the thing is, I felt like, because I was so young at the time, I'm still quite young, but because I was so young at the time, especially to the
Okay,
kids,
then don't rub
a
it
lot of
in.
them, a lot of them were inspired by the fact that I started, and I felt like a lot of them actually appreciated that I wasn't too far off their age and I was doing a leadership role, because I kind of understood how they were thinking. It didn't mean I have to be a leader. I had to be a leader to for that to happen. But I think because in the school that I was in, they needed someone that understood the kids, that was in a leadership role, and I could advocate for them. There wasn't enough advocates at the time when I was at that school. So I think, again, it goes back to the person. Like, are they checking them enough in these classrooms to make sure that they are the right fit for that school? Are they checking them in the classroom, and even the way they interact with their colleagues, to make sure that they are the right person for leadership? Are we looking at all the other aspects before we actually decide, yes, you can go for that role? I think that's where things may be a bit blurry.
Okay. Thank you so much, Hope. You mentioned the intensity of the workload during the training program makes Teach First candidates especially believe that they can undertake leadership roles. How much of the training, or how many modules, are dedicated to leadership? Or is it predominantly teaching and learning?
Funny enough, it's actually predominantly teaching and learning.
Mhm.
There wasn't actually much emphasis. Well, from what I remember anyway, there wasn't much emphasis on leadership. I think my school just had the pressure that they were supposed to do something with me after the year. So just to impress Teach First at the time, they were like, "Okay, we're gonna make her a leader." Couldn't see that. So I think it's the idea that it was a lot of teaching and learning. It was very, very, very big on teaching and reading all the literature surrounding teaching and how to be a good teacher. So when it's so intense and when people are always watching you to make sure that you're doing the right thing, then you kind of feel like you can do it. So I don't know if it was a pro or con,
Okay.
but depending on the person.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And that is what the debate is all about. Are these programs really equipping young teachers to become effective leaders? Or is the pressure too much? And then when the pressure gets to such teachers, they then leave the classroom. And this is what somebody else had to say. They said they jump into the fire and then they flounder, leading them to quit and return to the private sector. And so I would love for you to share your thoughts on that, because you did mention that some people use it as a stepping stone. And when you said that, that really impacted on me a little bit, because I don't know if it's because I think maybe like Tom, teaching is almost in my blood. And if you probably cut me, you'll see lesson plans and learning walks and book monitoring flying out of my veins. So to learn that for some people it's a stepping stone, that did hurt me a little bit. Do you want to elaborate on that, Ewan? Is it because people come in and what they're expecting they didn't get? Is it the behavior in the classroom? Is it lack of guidance? Because mind you, a lot of the accelerated programs, the teachers are expected to be the coaches and the mentors, and they have their own challenges as well and their own demands. So either Ewan or Hope, because you both did the Teach First, shed some light on that. Is it just a stepping stone, or is it people just genuinely go into it to become an effective teacher, and 2 years later they're like, "Nah, I can't deal with teenagers telling me to shut up."
I think obviously first and foremost, what is really important to highlight here is certainly the sympathy that we have for teaching at the moment. I think obviously
Mhm.
I really do empathise with you there, Michelle. Obviously, when you do hear about stepping in and out of the role, because obviously when you've got someone as such as yourself who is so dedicated
Mhm.
to the role, you feel like, am I really in the right thing? Is my passion misplaced? And I think no, it's not. It's not, because teaching is one of those things that it isn't just a job, is it? I mean, everyone says that
No.
it's not just a job. It's not even just a career. It's a vocation.
Mhm.
And I think obviously the desired goal of any of these teaching courses, no matter what background it is from, is to instill a love of learning not only in the kids but also in the teachers themselves. I,
Yeah.
I frankly feel that I have massively enjoyed my journey into teaching. We can all grumble and we can all talk about like the issues that can crop up, certainly, but I think in many ways the people that stick with the journey are the ones
Mhm.
that enjoy learning the most, and see obviously there is a great deal of value in that. Inherently, people that do go into other things, they're following their life's passions, and I think everyone
Yeah.
should follow their passions. I think in many ways we sort of all wish that there were more people that were passionate.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ewan. Survival of the fittest. That brings me back to you, Hope, because you've taken a little break. Here's your chance to tell the public, why have you taken a break? I know you will go back, but why? We're curious.
So for me, I think I did, because as I've kind of mentioned, I did go in really strong into
Yeah.
teaching, and I was saying it to my little brother earlier today that I cared a lot. I mean, I felt like every child was my little sibling. And again, because I was so similar in age to them, I was like, that's me. Like, you're basically me. And I need to make sure that you get what you get. And when they are, I felt like I was getting a bit too sensitive when it comes to certain things. I was so passionate about their future.
Mhm.
And I was so passionate about the end goal and making sure that they are where they need to be.
Mhm.
So I had to talk to myself, and I felt like my passion started feeling a bit misplaced, because I looked around. I was like, no one else is shouting. No one else is as eager as me. What's going on?
Yeah.
Am I doing too much? Is
Mhm.
anybody else here trying to do what we're doing? Um, so I wanted to take the break because I wanted to get my love back.
Okay.
And I wanted to also experience what everyone's like, leave teaching and you have your 9 to 5 and it ends at this time. And so I wanted to see what that looks like because, like I said, I did go straight from university straight into the classroom. And I realized that, I don't know, maybe a lot of the teachers that did go into teaching didn't go straight into the classroom, especially the older ones. They had all experienced, recruitment or just corporate world. And they're like, yeah, it's not for me. And that's why I became a teacher. And I felt like I didn't have that thing to say, oh, yeah, no, I've done this before. And that's why I realized teaching is for me. So there was this almost like idea that it felt like everybody else. It was green. The grass is green on the other side. It felt a
Yeah.
little bit like that. So I wanted to see what the grass was like.
Is it Green Hope? Is the grass Green Hope?
It
And
is green,
Tom
but
just said, tell the public. Uh-huh.
it is green. I'm not going to lie to you. I do close my laptop at 4 o'clock. My job is from 8 to 4. I'm still kind of teaching. I'm an operational trainer, so I train people for a particular role in the home office. But I will say I miss children in terms of I miss the engagement with them. I miss the community. Like I remember now why I went into teaching, if that makes sense. Like I will obviously see this role too until the end, but I will happily definitely go back to teaching. But I think I needed this to kind of get me back to where I used to be, and obviously hopefully not as sensitive as I was, because I did take a lot of and that's why the school that we all met at, the school that me and you met at, Michelle, was felt different because I needed kids to have that drive because I had it for them. And so I think this was really, it's a nice break to remind myself why I do have that drive, but also maybe have to tame my drive so that I'm not disappointed when I don't receive that from the students as well.
Thank you. And it's good to know that you intend to come back, because I think you have so much to offer. And yes, you're still teaching, but just in another capacity. Also, don't forget that children keep us young and they keep us abreast of all the slangs and the changes, and we want to be in the know, right? So it's so important that you remain connected to young people, because they really keep us on our toes. Yeah. Thank you so much. And Lauren, share your thoughts as well about the fact that some people don't stick around. I know for you, for example, you mentioned it earlier, and I mentioned it in your introduction. So you trained as an English teacher. I think you're still teaching some English, but you've now stepped into the leadership of the wonderful world of dance. Do you think your training prepared you for that, or is it just the demand at the time?
It was interesting.
To make this transition, yeah.
Yeah, I was having this discussion with a member of staff today, and they turned around and said kind of that, oh, well, I just want to focus on my subjects. Like, why am I having to teach another one? And kind of was like talking to me. And I said, well, I actually don't mind what I teach. Like, it really doesn't matter to me. I think that was when I looked at getting into teaching after doing my degree. I couldn't decide whether I wanted to go down kind of the counselling route, which I had qualifications for, if I wanted to go and do teacher training. And I realised I love school. I love the environment of school, because you get basically these kids who arrive, who are 11, and they think they know it all. And then suddenly they're met by these 16-year-olds who are twice their size, got twice their attitude. And suddenly they realise they're a lot smaller than they thought. And you can then see them progress and mature and discover the world and build their own opinions rather than just regurgitating what it is that their parents have said for them for the past 11 years.
Yeah.
And you see them making those choices. No, I want to go off and do this. No, I want to go off and do that. And I think that's so powerful. And being in a school, no matter what you teach, you impact that.
Yes.
And I think that is so it doesn't matter to me what it is that I teach. I mean, I love teaching dance more than English because it's not as heavily exam based.
Okay,
but I still love teaching. Yeah. But I still love the actual teaching of English. I think is great.
Yeah.
But what I love about kind of dance is the freedom of, you know, even though you might take your BTEC in it or you might take a GCSE in it, it's about all of that extracurricular stuff. It's building that confidence, which I think can sometimes get lost in core subjects because, you know, but if you don't pass this exam, you will have to retake it. And so it becomes this idea of like, oh, I must pass, rather than I want to develop a love of this subject. But I think one of the big things about teaching is so much of it relies on goodwill. And when you're young or younger, I think there's only a certain amount of goodwill when you see everybody around you not having to give that. Whereas kind of, especially if you don't always see kind of the response from that goodwill, putting in that extra hour with a student and then seeing them do well in their exam, that's a long time to wait for that thanks, that gratitude, that feeling of, oh, I did the right thing. And I think that's where the big issues are in teaching. How much can you push somebody's goodwill before they decide, actually, do you know what, it's not worth it?
Yeah. But thank you for that. And we just keep pushing, right? And what I'm getting from this conversation with you, Lauren, is that it doesn't matter what you're probably trained to teach. If you transition over into something else, you are still transferring those skills and ultimately impacting on the outcomes of young people. And that for me is interesting because you can correct me if I'm wrong, Ewan or Hope, but I believe that for Teach First, you don't necessarily train to teach the subject that you have your first degree in. And for some people, that is an issue because especially people who follow the traditional routes are saying, well, if you did a degree in geography, why are you coming to be English and be line manager of English, for example? So people always have those discussions. But Lauren is saying you've got the passion and you're impacting on lives positively, then it shouldn't be a problem. We're going to take a break now for the news. Do stay tuned. And when we come back, we will round up the discussion. Thank you all for joining so far, everybody who's joined, whether you're live with us here on Podbean, I can see you, or you're listening somewhere. All my Jamaican people, hello, hello, and thank you so much for joining. Stay tuned. We will be right back.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
We have featured the issue of overseas students applying to UK universities a number of times on Teachers Talk Radio News. This year's application figures have recently been released. An analysis by the BBC shows the numbers are up for the second year in a row. The latest data shows over 115,000 students from outside the UK have applied, up almost 1,000 on last year. The rise comes despite tougher government rules to help reduce migration. It also follows accusations that universities have lowered standards to recruit overseas students, who can be charged more than students from the UK. Despite the rise, the number remains below pre-pandemic levels. UCAS Chief Executive Dr. Joe Saxton said UK applications have also risen in recent years. However, Vivienne Stern, Chief Executive of Universities UK, said the figures did not tell the whole story, as applications do not always translate into enrolments. She said that any future fall in enrolments could make it more difficult for universities to offer places to home students due to the financial impact. Ms. Stern went on to explain that UK universities may be less appealing to overseas students due to policy changes around bringing family, competition from universities in the US and Australia, and unhelpful government rhetoric. Full details of the story can be found on the BBC News website. The Mathematical Association's Twitter feed draws attention to changes announced by government on Maths and English condition of funding for 16 to 19-year-old learners. The changes, which can be found on the government website, include minimum teaching hours for full-time students, saying that they should be 3 hours per week for English and 4 hours per week for maths. It also states this should be standalone, whole class, in-person teaching. The extra hour reflects the existing expectation should be prioritised to ensure students receive a standard number of taught hours. Compliance will be measured for the academic year 2025 to 26. Full details of the impact on funding and other changes can be found on www.gov.uk. The post on Twitter did prompt renewed concerns about maths teacher recruitment and timetabling issues. FE Week also featured a story on the changes, calling them unworkable and a backward step. Wales Online features a story about languages teaching and qualifications, but not in the way you might expect. Whilst the Welsh National Party have long campaigned for increasing Welsh language teaching, members of the Wales Somaliland community are urging the Welsh Government to include a GCSE in Somali language in the new Welsh curriculum. The community is writing to Education Minister Jeremy Miles to explain the importance of this to the 15,000-strong Somaliland community, saying it is important for young people to recognise and gain qualifications in their language and heritage. Community activist Ali Abdi said it was important that the large number of Somali pupils studying Welsh secondary schools learned their mother tongue and be recognised for their linguistic and cultural heritage. According to Mr Abdi, introducing a Somali GCSE aligns with the Welsh Government's commitment to diversity, equality and social justice. Finally, the BBC reports on research which has examined children's attitudes towards the monarchy. The outcome of the research suggests more support for the royals among state schools than in private ones. The study by King's College London found 66% of children in state schools aged 6 to 12 had a positive view of the monarchy, compared with 56% in private. It also found higher levels of support among children than among teens and young adults. The findings were based on questions for 2,000 pupils across 200 schools. The findings on primary school children in England, Scotland and Wales were in stark contrast to the views of young adults, with a YouGov twice-yearly poll showing only 27% of 18 to 24-year-olds saw the monarchy as good for Britain. The researchers said the primary children responding to questions around the monarchy had said it made them feel happy, excited or proud. Researchers could not explain the difference between state and private, but suggested it could reflect higher levels of international pupils in the private school sample, meaning they could have less of a connection to the British royal family. Further details of the research and its findings, as well as comparisons with other studies, can be found on the BBC News website. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Thank you so much, Jo. Lots of great information there for all of us. And we're now entering the final few minutes of our show, which I think has been such an engaging discussion. And I must thank my guests for making it worth our while this evening. And so before we round up, I'm going to give you each a minute. And what message would you like to leave with skeptics about anything outside of the traditional route to teaching? Those who think now it should just be university or college based and we should not have a fast track or apprenticeship route. What message would you like to leave with them tonight? And Lauren, I'm starting with you, and then Ewan, and then Hope.
I would probably start off by saying that I think in the nicest way possible, you're wrong. I think that every training kind of course offers its own benefits. So I think teaching and learning while you're in the classroom, it gives you an extra year of experience because you're in that classroom. You've got that practical experience to reflect on. You've got that practical experience to develop, to grow. And I think that's so important with teaching, especially as, you know, you never know what's going to come up. You turn up every day, and even though that's the plan you've got, suddenly something happens and it goes out the window because they don't remember what they did last lesson. And I think practical experience is so valuable. And things like Teach First, if it gets teachers into the classroom, then that's a really important thing to do, because even if, it's something horrific, like 50% of teachers leave within the first 5 years or something, at least you've had those teachers in the room and you can persuade them in those 5 years to stay. even if it's only you've persuaded half of them. Whereas if it's always going down a university route, if you haven't got kind of the money to be able to do it unsalaried, then are you putting off a whole load of people that would never become teachers?
Fantastic. So Lauren, what I gathered from all of that, to sum it up, you were saying to those people, you're wrong.
Yeah, basically. In a word.
You're wrong. Thank you. Ewan, sum it up for us. 1 minute. What's your message to the skeptics?
I think above everything else, it is absolutely imperative that we recognise that this is something that everybody, if qualified, and if you've got that energy, that fire in you, to absolutely give it a go. I think, if anything, obviously, I've come across tonight in a way probably where I've said, oh, well, you've got to consider this problem and this problem. But overall, it is such a rewarding and wonderful journey to be on. And I look forward to where it takes me, myself, and obviously where I might find that. But I think to anyone that is skeptical about teaching, actually is skeptical about, even if they really could just click apply online, is to honestly say, just dive in.
Great. So Lauren said, you're wrong. Ewan says, just dive in. It is rewarding. Hope, what have you got for us?
Not as profound as the both of them. But what I would like to say is that I found that people that did go through that university route, not everyone, but a lot of the people that I came across during my training, they didn't feel as equipped because they didn't go straight into the classroom, and they felt like I had more experience than them because I was in the classroom. Because a lot of them did have teachers with them the whole 2 years of their training, and then now they have to sit in a classroom on their first day, and it didn't feel as confident. So I think we can't take away this route when I think it's what actually, like Lauren says, it's what gets the teachers that shouldn't be there out, or the people that have just done it for the money, or have just decided that they were just going to be teachers, but didn't realize how important and how intense the role was going to be. I think this is the best way of saying, actually, this is not for me. And that was the best route to go down if we wanted to find out who was going to last time or actually be there for a longer time.
Okay. So you're saying go for it. Some people will stay, some people will move on. Those who were meant to stay will stay.
Absolutely.
It does help with the teacher shortages, and it does help to make sure that students have a teacher in front of them. And also, what I'm gathering from all of you is that it's almost like hands-on training.
Definitely.
And a retired teacher, Ruth, in East Sussex, actually said something similar. She messaged to say that for the traditional route, she believes that they also need to have more time in the classroom, and she doesn't believe that the amount of practice they get is sufficient to prepare them in the long run. So it's about finding that middle ground and merging both worlds and getting the best for students and ultimately the best for society. And that takes us to the end of our show tonight. Thank you so much for joining, listeners. Thank you for tuning in. For those who made comments and likes, thank you so much. Special thank you to my guests, Hope and Lauren, and of course, Ewan, who joined us and sharing those invaluable and insightful experiences and comments as well. I really do appreciate that. Thanks again, listeners, and for joining Teacher Talk Radio. And remember, do tune in again in 2 weeks' time for another engaging and exciting discussion around teaching. Well, have a great night, and I will see you soon.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.